There are so many ways of implementing ISO 27001 in any environment, be it for a small, mid, or large organization, that honestly, it gets a little bit confusing. So I am going to deconstruct this for you. There are two things you need to understand before implementing ISO 27001, which is the management clauses and then the Annex A controls. In this video, we will be breaking down the broad intent or context of the various management clauses in ISO 27001. I will be explaining in details what these relevant clauses are, what to expect in an audit, what to understand, and evidence needed for each clauses. Hi team, welcome to Relevant GLC. If you are new to the channel, please do subscribe and turn on the notification bell to not miss any of our future videos. So let's begin. Let's begin with clause 4, context of organization. What is it all about? This is about understanding who we are as an organization. We will be looking at internal and external issues. These are the risks internal and externally to our management system that would prevent it from meeting its intended goals. We will also be looking at the needs of interest of the interested parties. What is interested parties? Interested parties are people or organizations that has things to do with the organization. We will go through to determine and identify the needs of interested parties. Lastly, we will look at the scope of ISMS, taking into account the various subclauses. 4.1. Understanding the organization and its context. What is it all about? Specifically, this refers to the internal and external issues. These are internal issues that can hinder our ISMS, or external issues that can also stop us from achieving our objectives. The main purpose is to consider the risks to the ISMS and managing them effectively. There are a number of internal and external issues that are relevant to the purpose of organization and that affects the ability of the ISMS to achieve its intended outcome. Here are a number of relevant internal issues. These include uncertainties in employment relations, significant organizational change, location move, company financial performance, company culture. These are all relevant internal issues. You could choose the group internal issues using the SWOT analysis. Let's look at some few examples of external issues. With regards to external environment in which an organization operates, there are a number of relevant external issues. These include politically motivated government policy changes, government instability, unrest in countries in which the organization operates, trade restriction or tariffs, economic challenges, interest and inflation. These are all challenges or issues that are external to what? The organization where the company operates. Let's look at an example of how to document the external and internal drivers. Here I do have a table where I have categorized it into 3 columns. I do have the driver type, driver description, and management system context. I have categorized it into 2 basic categories. We do have the external and then the internal. What are the drivers for what? External. Satisfy the requirements of external interested parties, including customers, external threats to the organization, information resources such as hacking or breach attempts, vulnerability, exploitation, or other targeted attacks. Here, we are looking at breaches that affect the organization and which is what? External to the organization. Management system context is going to be able to address these external issues by what? Customer contractual obligations. Identifying the vulnerabilities and threats and acting on both are crucial for a successful ISMS. Let's look at some of the internal drivers. Adoption of information security policies and procedures, the organization's improvement in what? Risk management, employees' commitment to safe computing, and adherence to corporate policies and standards. What are the management system contexts? Here, we are looking at processes are adopted and followed to meet the requirement of the organization's policy. Overall governance, implementation, and ISMS security posture and maturity. Awareness surrounding the risk of the organization and mitigation efforts of the risks to the organization. Let's look at 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Let's take a deep dive into what the standard is requiring, how to implement it, and look at couple of examples. Firstly, let's look at what is interested parties. Who are they? What are they interested in? What are their goals and objectives? So let's look at what is the purpose of clause 4.2? The purpose is to make sure you have considered people, their requirements, and how you will address their requirement to the information security. An interested party is defined as a person or organization that can affect or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activities. As I earlier explained, the following are defined as interested parties that are relevant to the ISMS: stakeholders, board of directors, third parties, customers, regulatory bodies, employees of the organization, emergency service, trade unions, media, competitors. Applicable legal and regulatory requirements arises from the following. We do have the SOX Act, the EU Data Protection Regulation, the HIPAA, PCI, NIST, ISO 9000, consumer protection legislation, and so on. You can name them and so on and so forth. Let's look at an example of how to document the requirement. The table below shows an example of how to detail the expectations and relevant information security requirements of interested parties and legal and regulatory bodies to external and internal interested parties. So I do have an external interested party example. Here I have listed customers and third parties. Their requirements relevant to the ISMS. The customers are saying that protection of customer information, which is the CIA triad, confidentiality, availability, and integrity, is very key to the customers, and compliance with what the contractual agreement between you, which is the organization, and then the customers. You need to disclose any relevant information, security breaches or incidents. You should also make sure that there is an availability of services that you are providing to them. Third parties, which comprises of suppliers and what? Vendors. Provide confidentiality of data provided for business purposes and establish a trust in service capability. What are some of the interested parties for internal? Here we are looking at what? The legal and stakeholders. Legal, their requirements relevant to what? ISMS. Determine the applicability of legal requirements that may impact information security program operations. So these are examples of both what the internal interested parties and external interested parties. Let's look at clause 5, leadership. 5.1 under leadership is leadership and commitment. The principle behind this clause is sound. After all, an organization approach to ISO 27001, its information security management system, and its approach to information security will not be successful unless there is a management commitment. This clause lists out 8 specific top management are required to do. All 5.1 really says is that top management must support the implementation and management of the information security management system. To me, if your ISMS is operating as it should be, then that is significant evidence that this clause requirements are being met. However, that is not quite the same thing as saying that if you are certified to ISO 27001 and continue to keep that certification, then you have the required level of leadership and commitment. This is because the certification audits are never absolute. Certain assurances that all is well with the ISMS. This is the main reason, including the fact that the certification audit typically only happens once a year and only sampling exercises. Let's look at more specific ways of assessing. Then here are some few possibilities. Allocating resources to management of the ISMS, which is kind of obvious. Some of top management attends the opening meetings of the certification audits. This is recommended. The top management being readily available to talk to the certification auditor. Top management having some level of understanding of the information security risk to the organization as given in the formal risk assessment. Also, top management undertaking in a timely way any annual information security awareness training given to all staff. As I say, there are just some ideas, and leadership and commitment does not finally necessarily require all of this. Let's look at 5.2, which talks about security policy. There are thousands of examples of information security policies out there, but most of them contain more details than mostly I recommend people to look at. My view is that you should keep the information security policy as short as possible and simple. More importantly, some people write the information security policy by just looking at the purpose and scope, looking at the roles and responsibilities, and then having the main content of information security. Others also use the controls of ISO 27001, the Annex A controls, and uses them to write what their information security. As I stated, it should be short and concise So you could be able to pick up just pieces of things that your organization do and then put it inside the information security policy. A typical example will be under you picking under Annex A. You are looking at, let's say, the onboarding and offboarding of your employees. You can pick that and put it inside your information security policy. You can just pick a little blurb out of it and add it into your information security policy. As I indicated, this clause indicates that top management will establish an information security policy and would include the objectives, making it available to interested parties and communicate it. And this is why it should always be short and concise. Let's also look at 5.3, how to do organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities in ISO 27001. The principle behind this is that people in the organization need to be clear about what part they have to play in making sure all is well with information security in the organization. As an auditor myself, I have met senior people in most organizations, and when the question is asked of them, what part do you play with respect to information security, you always have a blank answer. They are not able to provide you answers. And in my own view, this is not good. Due to the above principle I have stated, as an implementer currently, I make sure senior people in the organization or in-scope people are aware of their role that they play in the information security management system. Hence, helping to facilitate the goodwill of maturity in our ISMS. What roles should be defined in an ISMS? Let's look at specific roles you must have and you must also define in your ISMS. A manager of an information security management system, someone who reports to the performances of the ISMS to top management, an internal auditor. These are all formal roles that must be assigned in the ISMS. There are some other clauses in ISO 27001 that can be interpreted as implying some other roles, but I always suggest keep it simple and then also use roles that are already existing in the organization. Let's look at other roles in the organization that have some information security responsibilities, like the CTO, CEO, CISO, security architecture, the facilities manager, the chief risk officer. Also, these are considerably dependent on what the organization already has. How should you document this? There is no formal requirement in ISO 27001 to document this, but I always recommend that you need to have a separate document to document the roles and responsibilities within the organization. There are a few different ways of doing this, which I suggest. You can do it by putting the roles and responsibility inside your information security policy. You can create a separate organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities, which would define what are the roles that the organization already have, or go by what the HR department already have over these information security people, as we call the job description within the organization. We will be able to see some of the mandatory documentation under clauses 5. We have the information security objectives, the communication plan, and then the information security policy. I'll later down the line be showing you examples in details of these documents. But let's look at just the structure of the information security management objectives. So here, information security management objectives, here we are looking at what? We are looking at building an information security program that can provide consistency. So like as I said, in the information security objectives, you can have 5 columns. You can either build it the SMART approach or you can build it in any approach that you want. Do not let any auditor tell you that your objective should always be in a SMART approach. That is not true. This is also a typical format that you can see under your communications plan. You have other columns. We can talk about the communication column. Whom will you communicate to? Typically the audience. Who is going to be the sender? Who is going to be communicating this information to the audience? What is going to be the message? What is going to be the method of communication? And what is also going to be the frequency? So this is just a template of how you could build both communications plan and your information security objective. Let's take a deep dive into clause 6, planning. Why you need risk assessment in ISO 27001. Under clause 6, there is action to address risks and opportunity. If you already know the answer to this question, then well done. You are in the minority. However, in my experience, most people reaction to this is one or more of the following. What do you mean risk assessment? Let me explain. You all very familiar with the information risk assessment. It is the fundamental basis of ISO 27001 and it is a vital component of your ISMS. People talk about it a lot. It is about the bad things that might or might not happen to the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of the information in your scope. Let's look closely at this clause, which is the fundamental basis of ISO 27001 and very vital to the ISMS. Let's look at the risks and opportunity. Let's look at some example of risks. There is a risk that there is insufficient resources or management commitment put into ISMS. We do not have anyone allocated to management on an ongoing basis. There is a risk that ISMS manager leaves. There is a risk that we get a major non-conformity at the surveillance audit or any stage of the audit. Let's look at some opportunities. Clients reorganizes that ISO 27001 and gives them confidence in our management of information risk and as such reduces their on-site audit. In the event of data breach, the implications and potential fines are reduced because we recognize that we have been taking security seriously by implementing an ISMS. When I implement an ISMS for an organization, I always create a risk and opportunities register. However, I have never been asked to show it to a certification auditor during a certification audit. Hence, I would advise you can create this, which would help in addressing the coming preambles. Let's look at the clauses under 6.1.1, which emphasizes what we just talked about, the risks and opportunity. It also throws more light on what needs to be done under clauses 4 in the standard, internal and external issues, the internal interested parties, and scope. Let's look at some few questions you can consider asking yourself when performing or addressing risks and opportunities. What could go wrong with an initial implementation of ISMS? What could go wrong with or because of the ongoing operations of ISMS? What is the good thing that might happen in relation to or because of what? Your ISMS. Note, ISO 27001 doesn't require this to be documented, as I have already stated, but documenting it will be helpful to provide evidence to auditors in case when they ask. Also, if you are an organization that documents project risks, operational risks, any form of risks, then you have already covered this. For organizations who do not have it, I suggest you do it. Let's now look at risk assessment and treatment under clauses 6.1.2 and 6.1.3. Note that there are different techniques and methodologies out there in managing risks. There are different approaches on how you could be building out your risk management in an organization. Here, we will just look at the basic idea of risk assessment and the requirements set by ISO 27001. Before we get going on this, it is worthwhile bearing in mind that risk management or risk assessment is simply a management technique that helps you make business decisions. In risk assessment, you are merely identifying and listing out the risks. That is, what are the bad things that might or might not happen to the information in the scope of your ISMS. In satisfying 6.1.3, you will need to get a formal record, each of the risk owner saying that they agree with what the risk assessment says about their risks. This should be something like, I approve the information security risk plan, treatment plan, and acceptance of the residual information security risk for my risk. Why is this necessary? This is necessary because in a risk assessment, you are merely identifying and listing the risk, as I have earlier stated. Therefore, each risk identified, you need to assign an owner. You need to list out the current things in place that are helping manage these risks to less likely to happen. You need to also talk about the controls that has also been put in place around these risks and also trying to reduce the impact and likelihood of the risks to occur. You need to determine the risk levels and ascertain the level of risk that is going to be in the organization, and then implement an action whereby those actions should be accepted by the risk owners. Let's look at objectives and planning to achieve them. As I earlier showed you the information security objectives under clauses 5, 6.2 is cementing the idea of you having an information security objectives and how you will plan to achieve them. ISO 27001 is saying that establish objectives and plans at relevant functions and levels. You need to be a bit more formal about your objectives, as I've earlier showed you. So you need an information security objective document which lists out each of the formal objectives and some details in a smart approach. Remember, auditors cannot tell you to make your objective in a smart approach, as I've earlier showed you. Specifically, I am suggesting listing out for each objective the following: what will be done, who will be responsible, when it will be completed, how the objectives will be monitored. This is the approach that mostly I do use, and it is very effective. You can choose the smart approach as I've earlier showed you in the above, or you can go by this method, which is simple and very effective. Let's look at planning of changes. This is a new clause that did not exist in the 2013 version, but it's now existing in the 2022 version. When the organization determines the need for changes to the information security management system, the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. There is little to say about this added control. I am really not sure why it was added, but I am vehemently addressing it because you have constantly been addressing this throughout the course of your ISO 27001 implementation. So let's look at some few examples which might constitute a change and will be regarded as planning for change. A change in a physical architecture, the change in your IT architecture as well. More or less, probably your data centers has shut down. You are moving from one cloud solution to the next. You are being taken over by another company, or you are acquiring new subsidies or new companies, or company has gotten taken over, or you are changing the scope of the ISMS, feedback from interested parties, which is customers that are complaining. So all these are changes that are happening in your organization. And I'm believing that that is the reason why you need to plan of changes in your ISMS. Let's look at some mandatory documentation that needs to be provided under the clause 6. As I earlier stated, your risk assessment is a key documentation you need to provide. What is your risk and your treatment methodologies? You need to provide your statement of applicability, which I'll be showing you earlier. I'll be doing a full video of how to construct a statement of applicability. Clauses 6.1.3e and 6.2.8.3 talking about your risk treatment plan, which is part of as I earlier stated, part of what the risk assessment in total all stands about. And then looking at 5.1 under clauses 5, cementing the idea of clauses 6.2, information security objectives. Let's now shift our focus and our attention onto support, clauses 7. The resource under clauses 7, the organization shall determine and provide the resources needed for implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of information security management system. Simply put, here you are demonstrating what people, tools, money, time, training, and infrastructure needed to run the ISMS. You are looking at people that you are bringing in to manage your information security. You are looking at the time that is going to cost for you to be able to implement ISO 27001 in organization. You are looking at when the people come into the organization, the training that they are going to be taking, what are the infrastructure that needs to be built around to make sure that your ISMS runs smoothly. This is typically what you do under 7.1, which is resources. We then look at the people that comes into the organization or the people that are in the organization to address our competency, which is 7.2. The idea here is to help make sure that people or employees who perform information security activities within organization have the required level of skills to do it properly. This standard requires the organization to undertake a training need analysis or a gap analysis to see what gap, if any, there are in their skills and competence. Evidence or deliverable needed include evidence of training courses attended, CVs, LinkedIn profile, conferences attended, meetings. These are all things that can be used to satisfy the competency of an employee or people that are performing the information security activities within the organization. Documented information 7.5, which is very necessary for the ISO 27001. As I've earlier mentioned in my previous videos, there are certain mandatory documentation that we need under ISO 27001 using 27707 as our guide. So we do have the scope of ISMS under clauses 4.3, information security policy under clauses 5.2, 6.1.3, information security risk assessment process, treatment processes, statement of applicability, information security objectives. You get the idea. These documentations are very necessary. But in addition to this documented information, you should be able to also provide the controls summary, whereby you need to know what is the version of the document, what is the person who updated the documentation. This should show what the documented information of these policies or documents or this mandatory document has been provided in ISO 27001. Let's look at competency metrics, an example of a competency matrix. So here you could see I have a table of a competency matrix which have it in 3 columns. We have the employee names, what are the certification that they have attained, and what are the tools, their skills and knowledge on the tools that is being used within the organization. Some people also add the conferences that they have attended. So like, as I said, employee name. So probably you could say, let's say John Smith has CISA certificate, he has its CCNA, he has his CCNP. What are the tools that the organization uses? So probably the organization uses KnowBe4, the organization uses Qualys, the organization uses Archer. What is his skill level? So you could see I have T for trained. You could see X as experience, P for the organization is planning to train John Smith on that tool, or there is a gap that John Smith do not know or do not have any knowledge about those tools in the organization. So this is just a simple overview of how you can create a competence matrix in the organization. You can add this as part of your deliverable to the auditor in the implementation of your ISO 27001. Clauses 8, which looks at the operations, which is very key as we've earlier stated. So clauses 8 is just cementing everything that you need under what? Clauses 6. So mandatory documentation under clauses 8, we are looking at what? The risk treatment plan, the risk methodology, we are looking at the risk assessment report and treatment. So these are just cementing everything that you need to do under clauses 6. Let's look at performance and evaluation of clauses what? 9. Let's look at performance and evaluation, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. Let's start with some basics. What do you mean by monitor? This means that we observe something over a period of time. Measure, it means we assess it somehow, analyze and evaluate. It means look at the results of our measuring and monitoring to make a decision. This is about making a decision. You need to do whatever you need to understand enough about the performance of the ISMS and your controls to make decisions. Do not let anyone try to force you into lots of metrics and KPIs, KIRs for your ISO 27001. If whatever you have put in place works for you, then that is sufficient enough to satisfy this clause 9.1. What I do is that I create a spreadsheet of 3 columns whereby I list the controls and the clauses, and then I have the next column calling it a RAG approach, and also a third column calling an action plan. In these 3 columns, as you can see in the template I have provided you, I have clauses 5, I have the RAG approach, and then I have the action plan. So let's say clause 5 is red, clause 6 is an amber, and then 5.5 is what is green. What does red means? It means that what? The control is not working, the clause is not working. Amber means, or yellow means that what? It is not working as it should be, and green means that it is working perfectly or it is okay. So here, my action plan, both the red and yellow, is going to indicate that I need to put in an action that will need to take from yellow to green and from red to green. From red to yellow and then yellow to green, which would show a progress in what? My monitoring, measurement, analysis, and what? Evaluation. The approach I have described for you successfully used in many of my implementation for ISO 27001. I have met the requirement ISO 27001 clauses 9.5 about monitoring and measurement, the performance of the ISMS and controls. It is suitable for all sizes of the organization, although larger organizations likely to need more structured technique and perhaps some metrics to support the assessment. And in some metrics to support the assessment, I am talking about them actually providing key metrics of maybe how they can be able to analyze and evaluate their ISO 27001. How to do ISO 27001 internal audit, clauses 9.2. The essence of this requirement is that you should check at plan interval that all is well with your information security management system. This check must be done by someone who has the right skills and is objective and impartial. So mind you, you can have anyone in the organization perform an internal audit in your organization, but the key importance here is they need to be what? Objective and impartial. You can have an independent organization, you can have an independent body, you can have an independent person to do your internal audit. But the key is they should be objective and impartial. I typically call this a health check. I don't even understand why they call it internal audit, because mostly not internal people in the organization performs an internal audit. In my opinion, for you to get key value of what this clause, you need to have someone who is objective and impartial in the organization to perform the internal audit. Internal audit cannot be performed. You can choose not to let internal audit be performed by just one person. You can look for several people to perform the internal audit on various controls. So you can just have maybe John Smith perform an internal audit on the clauses 4 to clause 10, and then you can maybe have Jennifer Smith to also perform Annex A controls from, let's say, Annex A 5 or Annex A6 or Annex A7 or Annex A8. You can let other people, provided that they do not have anything to do with the implementation of ISO 27001. As I earlier stated, they should be objective and impartial. So let's look at who can do this internal audit. There are a few considerations. What does ISO 27001 says that you must do? The key requirement is that the person doing this, as I've earlier stated, should be impartial. The person should be objective and also have the necessary skills. So that is very, 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 very important for you to consider when someone is performing the internal audit for your organization. As I earlier stated, what will stop the certification auditor raising non-conformities is when the internal audit has been done by an impartial person, someone who is objective and someone who has the right skills. In my experience, as I've earlier stated, these health check, as I do call it, are mostly conducted by people who are external to the organization or internal people who do not have anything to do with the information security implementation. What do we mean by plan interval? This means that you need to work out in advance and document what you are going to do and when. Sometimes this is simply our next health check will be December 2026. But sometimes this schedule or plan contains a lot more details about what is going to get audited and when, taking into account location, department, functions, controls, clauses. Some people have very complicated spreadsheets for all of this, although I am less keen on this. Why am I less keen on this complicated spreadsheet? In order for you to build a health check plan schedule, it is simply by just listing out the clauses or controls and then stating when the health check is going to be done. And that is as simple as that. There is no need for you to have a lot of requirements going into your spreadsheet. As I earlier stated, you could just have an internal audit plan, which is going to be at plan interval. So you could say clauses 5, we are going to perform a health check on clauses 5 in January. We are going to conduct a health check on Annex A 5.2 February. This is just as simple as just listing it out and just stating when the health check is going to be done. And that is what you could be able to do with regards to an internal audit. Let's now look at management review 9.3. How to do a management review in ISO 27001. Clauses 9.3 of ISO 27001 requires that an organization conducts a management review of the information security management system. This clause explains the requirement fairly clearly. But the idea here is to have a high-level check of how it is all going. So what do I mean by you need to have a high-level check or high-level review of what is all going in your ISMS? As I've earlier stated, you need to now go through all the clauses 4 to clauses 10 and then look at everything that has happened and then perform a high-level review or high-level check on these clauses. Now, in performing this clauses check, you need to look at this 4-step approach. Attendees and meeting which is going to be set up, agenda for the meetings, holding the meeting itself, and documenting the results of the meeting. What do we mean by attend and meeting setup? So Here we are talking about the information security people, or the people who are responsible for the information security. Top management, SMEs, they need to be in this meeting, whereby you need to talk about what? The health check of what? ISMS. One or more people identified as risk owners should also be present. Some people who are identified in your documentation somewhere as playing part of the management of the information security system as a whole. As I earlier stated, you need to have these people in here to look at what? The overall levels of information in your ISMS. What do I mean by agenda for the meeting? ISO 27001 has clearly stipulated what you need to talk about in these meetings. The status of action for previous management reviews, changes in internal and external issues, feedback on the information security performance, including trends of non-conformities and corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, audit results, fulfillment of information security objectives, feedback from interested parties, and any changes in the need and expectations of what? Interested parties, results of your risk assessment and status of risk treatment plans, objectives of continual improvement, incidents, business continuity plans, information security awareness. So these are things that you need to be able to talk about when you are holding the meetings in what? Your ISMS. So typically, as I always advise people, you need to hold your the management review once every year. After what? The audit in the organization. So you perform an internal audit, you perform an external audit. Once these two pieces are done, you need to now perform what? A management review of what has really transpired within that fiscal year, and then relay this information to what? Management. Let's look at the final clause 10, improvement. These requirements indicate that the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the information security management system. I would say this totally depends on the organization and the definition of continual improvement within that organization. I totally agree that this should be documented as under management review. Therefore, there should be a record for opportunities for continual improvement, as this is going to be vital to see whether there is a maturity in your ISMS. Because once you are documenting continual improvement in your ISMS, whether you are documenting the risk, whether you are documenting processes and procedures within the organization, whether you are showing growth in your ISMS or program as a whole, this record is going to provide vital role under the management review once that comes into question. Let's look at non-conformities and corrective action. Simply put, it's simply that doesn't meet requirements. Non-conformity is simply something that doesn't meet a requirement. Corrective action, also simply put, is resolving those non-conformities that has been identified. There are several types, sources that non-conformities can be what? Raised with respect to the information security management system. Something that does not meet the requirement of ISO 27001, like I earlier stated, something that is happening within the ISO 27001 clauses 4 to 10, and it is not what? Effectively working and improving the ISMS. These are all non-conformities. Something that you have stated that you need for your ISMS to meet the objectives, that is not happening. These are also what? A non-conformities. If you have a kappa within the organization that can affect your ISMS, those are also non-conformities. Let's look at some mandatory documentation, or how you can what? Document your continual improvement, and then the non-conformity and corrective action. So non-conformity and corrective action, this is a template of how I build my non-conformity and corrective action. I indicate which year, when it was raised, what is the non-conformity about, what are the controls, and then the corrective action that we need to put in place. What is the time scale at which we are going to what? Fulfill these non-conformities and then corrective action. As I earlier stated, a record of your continual improvement is going to come in question when we talk about what? Your management improvement. How are you improving what? The ISMS. So again, as I earlier stated, I have what? The improvement opportunities. What are we improving? So assuming we are improving our documentation or the information security policy, you list it out, you put in the control that is affecting, what was the date that you identified this improvement, what are the activities that you are performing to make sure that this improvement is going to be successful, which department or who is it assigned to, when did they complete it, is there any what priority attached to this continual improvement. Assuming you have a disaster recovery plan. The organization has not does not have a detailed disaster recovery plan or has not tested their disaster recovery plan. It is an improvement of what you had first. So you can document it here and show the auditor that yes, initially we did not have a business continuity plan, but now we do have it, and this is the process and steps that we did to have a business continuity plan. And this brings us an end to implementing ISO 27001 from clauses 4 to clauses 10. In my next video, I'll be walking you through how to create various ISMS documents from scratch. If you found this video helpful or have any thoughts to share, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your feedback. Don't forget, next up, we are diving into building ISMS documentation from the ground up.